Your contract ended. You expected your bill to drop. It didn't. You called the network, sat on hold for 20 minutes, and a polite voice explained that actually, no, your monthly cost was staying exactly the same. You probably assumed it was a billing mistake. It wasn't a mistake at all. Vodafone, EE, O2 and 3 have been doing this deliberately to 28 million British customers, and the bill for it is currently sitting before the Competition Appeal Tribunal. The damages claim runs to £3 billion. This is exactly how they pulled it off and what they owe you. Your phone contract works like this. You pay a single monthly figure that covers two things: the cost of the handset spread across 24 months and the cost of your airtime. The network bundles them together, gives you one clean number, and you set up a direct debit and forget about it. Simple, transparent. That was always the pitch. And for the first 2 years, it feels fair enough. You're paying for a phone you're holding in your hand. The maths make sense. What also made sense to every person who ever signed one of those contracts was what happened at the end of month 24. The phone is paid off. The debt to the network is settled. From that point forward, you're paying for airtime only, calls, texts, data, and nothing else. Nobody told you this explicitly in most cases. Nobody needed to. The logic was baked into the structure of the deal. 24 months means the phone takes 24 months to pay for. After that, the phone is yours. The bill drops. That expectation wasn't naivety. These are Ofcom-regulated companies operating in plain sight. Their contracts are written by legal teams. Their billing systems are built by engineers. Every element of the monthly charge is calculated deliberately. Customers paying by direct debit, receiving a paper or digital bill they rarely interrogate in detail, trusted that the industry worked as advertised. They had every reason to. The four networks that dominate the British mobile market, Vodafone, EE, O2 and 3, are not obscure operators. They are brands with millions of customers, national advertising budgets, and a regulator watching over them. The assumption that the bill would drop was not unreasonable. It was the only reasonable interpretation of what a 24-month contract meant. This is important, because what came next was not a misunderstanding. It was not a rounding error in a billing system. It was not one network making a call center mistake. It was a practice running across all four of the biggest names in British telecoms simultaneously for years, and it only ended up in a courtroom because someone finally decided to count the money. The first signs that something was wrong did not come from the networks themselves. They came from customers who noticed their bills had not changed when their contracts ended, called to complain, and were given explanations that did not quite hold together. Consumer groups started logging the complaints. Citizens Advice published findings describing what it called a loyalty penalty, the perverse outcome in which customers who stayed with their network and did not switch were charged more than new customers arriving on promotional deals. The more data was gathered, the clearer the pattern became. This was not random, this was structural. Ofcom began looking at the practice with enough seriousness to put findings on the record. The picture that emerged from that scrutiny was not flattering for the industry. Customers who had completed their minimum contract term were routinely continuing to pay the full bundled rate, the rate that included the handset cost, long after the handset had been cleared. The networks knew this was happening. Their billing systems were not malfunctioning. The continued charge was not a ghost in the machine. It was the default, and the default had never been corrected. O2's conduct attracted specific, separate attention. Ofcom documented the practice of retroactive mid-contract price hikes, increases applied after a customer had signed, not disclosed with sufficient clarity at the point of sale. The customer agreed to a price. the price changed, and the justification offered was buried in contract terms that most people never read and fewer still understood. Ofcom did not describe this as a billing quirk. They criticised it formally and on the record. This was a regulator doing its job, and what it found was a company charging customers more than they had meaningfully agreed to pay. The other three networks had their own version of the same problem. The mechanism was slightly different, but the outcome was identical. A customer reached the end of their contract. The handset component of their monthly bill should have fallen away. It did not. The billing system continued as though the contract was still in its original term. The customer, seeing the same direct debit leave their account every month, had no obvious prompt to investigate. The network had no obvious incentive to flag it. Months passed, in some cases years. When the networks were pressed on this, publicly and by regulators, their response followed a predictable shape. The charges were disclosed in the contract. Customers had the option to switch. The pricing reflected the overall value of the service, not just the handset. Here is how Vodafone characterized the situation in a submission to Ofcom's review of the mobile handset market. Customers on out-of-contract tariffs continue to receive the full benefits of their service plan, and pricing reflects the totality of value delivered to the customer. A disclosed charge, they argued, is not an unfair one. The contract said what it said. The customer signed it. End of discussion. That was the claim. Here is what the Competition Appeal Tribunal is currently being asked to consider. The loyalty penalty claim, a collective action, proceeding before the tribunal, alleges that between 10.9 million contracts were affected by this practice across Vodafone, EE, O2 and 3. The total damages sought run from £1.1 billion at the floor to £3 billion at the ceiling. The average overcharge per customer is calculated at approximately £107. That is not the cost of a misunderstanding. That is not the accidental result of an opaque billing system. That is the arithmetic of a con run at industrial scale against people who trusted that their phone bill meant what it appeared to mean. Call it what it is. The networks took the money. They knew the handset was paid off. They kept billing the full rate anyway. That is the loyalty penalty, and it has a name now because someone finally did the maths. The four networks are named defendants in an active legal proceeding. Vodafone, EE, O2, 3. Not one of them, not the smallest or the most aggressive, but all of them simultaneously running the same practice against the same category of customer. The collective action structure of the loyalty penalty claim means that affected customers do not need to bring individual cases. The tribunal process does that work at scale, but the scale itself is the point. 10.9 million contracts, 28 million customers in the broader affected population, £107 per person. Multiply that out and you are not looking at a billing oversight. You are looking at one of the largest consumer financial extractions in British Telecom's history. O2's position is additionally exposed by the Ofcom findings on mid-contract price hikes. That finding sits separately from the tribunal claim, but points in the same direction. A regulator examined O2's conduct, examined what customers were told at the point of sale, examined what they were subsequently charged, and criticised the gap between the two formally. Ofcom does not issue formal criticism lightly. When they put findings on the record, it means the evidence met a threshold. For O2, that threshold was met. The hikes were retroactive. The disclosure was inadequate. The customer had no meaningful ability to anticipate or refuse the increase. That is not a technicality. That is the definition of being misled. The coldest number in this entire case is not the 3 billion ceiling. It is the 1.1 billion floor. That is the minimum the tribunal is being asked to award. the best case scenario for the networks if they argue successfully that the damages should land at the lower end of the range, still produces a figure that runs to 11 figures. That is the flaw of what was taken. The loyalty penalty claim is live. No judgment has been handed down, no compensation has been paid. The timeline for a tribunal decision of this complexity is measured in years, not months, and there is no mechanism right now that automatically returns money to affected customers while the case runs. If you are on a contract with any of these 4 networks and your bill did not drop when your minimum term ended, you are likely in the affected population. The case is being brought as a collective action, which means affected customers are represented without needing to individually opt in to proceedings. Following the case, understanding where it stands, and keeping records of your billing history is the practical position available to most people right now. What this case also makes plain is that the opacity was not accidental. A billing system does not continue charging the full bundled rate past the handset payoff date because nobody noticed. These are companies with engineering teams, legal departments, and finance functions that model revenue to decimal points. The continued charge was a product of deliberate system design. The lack of a prompt to customers when their minimum term ended was a deliberate absence. Billing opacity is not a bug in the telecoms industry. It is a feature. It persists because it is profitable, and it stops being profitable only when a regulator or a court forces the arithmetic into the open. That moment you called the network and the polite voice told you your bill was staying the same. That was not a mistake. That was the plan. The next time Vodafone, EE, O2 or 3 sends you a text about a great new deal, a loyalty reward, a special offer for valued customers, remember what that loyalty was actually worth to them. £3 billion taken from people who trusted that a 24-month contract ended after 24 months.